His opponent here is James Bennett. The only thing we know about James Bennett is that he was rated 1725 and that he was from Fort Worth, Texas. Remember, this is going to be a Swiss system, even though 9 rounds and only 33 players. Bobby with a 2239 rating, that first round would be pared down substantially. James Bennett would have been the highest rated player in the lower half of the pairings. Or I shouldn't say that because I don't know if Bobby was the highest rated player in the field. But the way it works is you divide the field into 2, and the first player of the first half plays the first player of the second half. E4 by Bobby, of course. Well, I say of course, he was still playing some King's Indian attacks. A Sicilian defense by Bennett. Knight F3, Knight C6, and D4, and we have an open Sicilian. After pawn takes pawn and knight takes pawn, black plays Knight F6, Knight C3, D6 is the classical variation, and Bobby with Bishop G5. As you may have been expecting Bishop C4, I will mention that he was not yet playing Sozan's attack. G6 is the dragon variation. Bishop takes knight, pawn takes bishop, leaving black with an isolated D-pawn. And here, bishop to c4. The annotator wanting bishop to b5, which is the second most popular move. Let's show a couple alternate lines. This is only second in popularity with 76 games in the Masters database. And that's answered by bishop d7, castles, bishop g7, king's knight to e2, bishop e6, queen d2, and castles. I'll also show the third most popular line, which can also be played. It starts with queen d2 and bishop g7. And in this line, white castles to the queen side. So these are all options that are all viable. Bobby playing bishop to c4 here. Bishop g7, castles. You can see the arrow, queen d2, that's never been played. More frequent is this king's knight coming to b5. And that's, in my mind, the preferable choice. And after castles, white castles. Or you can play queen takes d6 here, since it's supported by the knight, in which case black plays pawn to f5. And that is considered to be equal. All right, let's go back here. Getting a lot of theory discussed in this game. Bobby castled his king behind his pawns. That's where he loves to be. We have castles here. Now knight db5 is played. And I'm not real sure why that would get an inaccuracy. But here f5 in this position looks pretty equal. E takes f5. Yeah, queen d2 does look good here, but again, it has never been played at the master level. Knight takes d6 here is also fairly common. I think it's played as often as the other, although the bot doesn't like that. E takes f5 was Bobby's choice. Bishop takes the f-man. Now knight takes d6 is played, and knight e5 appears in this game only throughout recorded chess history at the master level. It may certainly appear at the amateur level. Let's go look and see. I'm sure it probably does. Well, just a couple of times at the amateur level. I say amateur, but there is one game here where the players were rated in the high 2300s, but it appears in the amateurs database. All right, well, knight e5, not liked at all by the bot. The most common move, let's talk about that, is bishop takes the knight on c3, and that seems to maintain an equal position. That's answered by knight takes bishop on f5. Bishop takes the pawn. Yeah, pawn, let's go back here. I'll come back to this line in a moment. This line has also been played a few times. Pawn takes bishop, and then bishop takes the c-man. That diverts the queen, undefending the knight. So that is another line that has been played, and this too is considered to be equal. Come back to the line I was showing. Knight takes the bishop on f5 is answered by bishop takes b2, rook b1, and this bishop retreats to f6. And in case you're wondering, that also is considered to be equal. However, Bennett, not playing any of those lines, went with knight e5. Bobby retreats his bishop to b3, a pretty standard move that's not liked. Queen d7, definitely not liked. Now knight takes the bishop, and queen takes the knight. Knight d5, threatening to fork the king and queen, and that's defended with knight c6, covering the fork square. No Forkosaurus Rex can be played here. We can hit that queen, however, with knight e3, and the queen takes up refuge at the safety of c5. c3 by Fischer. Queen's rook to d8, hitting Bobby's queen, queen f3. Rook d7, with the idea of doubling his rooks on the d file. This gets an inaccuracy from the annotator, which prefers pawn to b5. I thought bishop h6 might work. Let's see what we get. Oops, I got to go back. Let's see what we get. Inaccurate. Oh, it changed it to a check mark, so good. But rook d7 was Bennett's choice, and Bobby with queen's rook to d1. Now rook d6, a curiosity. I mean, you lifted your rook presumably to double your rooks. I would think you'd go ahead and double them here. If you wanted to play to d6, you should have just played there in one turn, not two. The bot preferring to counterattack and hit white's queen with the knight on e5. What does the bot think about king's rook backing up its companion? I get a star for that move. Let's see how far we can take this. I would suppose rook f to e1. That gets a thumbs up. Knight e5 hits the queen. That gets a star. Queen e4 moves to safety. That gets a star. Rook takes rook, trades rooks with a thumbs up. Rook takes rook, star. Rook takes rook, star. And I'm going to take this with my knight. I get a thumbs up. It wanted the bishop instead. Still pretty good. Well, rook d6 is what was played here. And Bobby plays rook takes rook, queen takes rook, and rook d1 hits that queen. Queen goes back to c5. Queen c7 might be a better defense. The bot calling for queen b8. What does it think of queen c7? I get a thumbs up, and then it changed its mind to e7. After queen c7, white can play queen e4, and after rook d8, white can trade rooks. All stars here, and then we'd have to create some luft for our king with h4 or g4 or g3. Move a pawn, basically. Maybe g3 is probably safest. No, it liked h4. All right, coming back, queen c5 was played. h3, pawn b5 here. And here I definitely like the idea of queen to e7. The bot calling for queen b6. I get a star for my move. Bobby no doubt would continue to make progress here in the king's side. And these all look good. b5 was Bennett's move. Now Bobby attacks the queen with rook d5, queen b6, and rook d6, pins the knight, and super attacks the knight. However, it is a pseudo-pin because the pinned piece can attack a target of equal or greater value, namely a counterattack with knight e5. I like that move. Queen d5 was played. Ooh, bishop takes f7 recommended by the bot. That's juicy. Let's look that line over. That's a check. And then you would not want to capture with the rook because that opens the 8th rank. So you'd have to play king to h8, at which point I will then move my queen to safety. I suppose queen d1 or queen d5 should be playable, but the point is I'm still attacking the black queen. I get a star. Let's come back. Bobby with queen d5 right away, queen c7, pawn f4 hits the knight, knight c4. Knight takes the knight, pawn takes the knight, and bishop takes the pawn. Bobby has a passed pawn, and therefore an advantage. King h8 gets off of the a2 g8 diagonal. Bishop b3, pawn f5. Not liked by the bot. g3, rook e8. Now queen c6, looking to simplify and try to exploit his one extra passed pawn here. Well, he's got two extra pawns, but one passed pawn. Queen b8 was played, and rook d7 gets the question mark, and the eval bar lunges downward, ladles and jelly spoons. Yeah, he had to play king f1 to maintain his avantage. Interesting. Rook d7 was played, rook e1 check, and now king f2. And apparently he should have tried king g2, getting off of these dark squares. Queen e8, and that's threatening checkmate right here, isn't it? So queen f3 to defend, and here he could hope for queen d3, which would threaten a pin. Rook b1, this is now threatening queen to e1, check, followed by mate. Wow, aggressive by Bennett. Rook d1 prevents that. Rook takes the pawn, check, king g1. King f1 preferred, no doubt, so that you can bring this rook over. Queen c8. Bobby had an advantage, but it has slipped from his grasp. The bot calling for a5 here. I think h5 is also a move. I get a thumbs up. Either way, the position that was in white's favor is now equal. Queen c8 was Bennett's choice. White mounts an attack with h4, but yeah, queen e3 is probably a bit more appropriate. After queen e3, I would expect bishop f6. I get a star, and then rook d3. Let me just point out, you do not want to go pawn grabbing here. This would not be the place to play queen takes the pawn. That's a blunder because queen takes c3. And yeah, you've got a check you can throw, but the king is finding safety. And actually, black has a slight advantage here, even though white has an extra pawn, because black's pieces are much more appropriately coordinated than white's in this position. So no pawn grabbing. Oh, I was about to say, queen e3, however, is a bit better, but here you'd want to play rook d3. Okay, or rook d6, apparently. Let's come back. h4 was played, and James Bennett, who was back in it, missed the necessary queen c5 check, and played, speaking of pawn grabbing, speaking of ill-advised pawn grabbing, bishop takes the pawn, and look at that eval bar. Now you'll see why in a moment. I'll let you actually take a guess of your own. Boudinot, greetings. But necessary was this check, forcing the king on over. and then just play something like h5, and you are golden. Why is bishop takes pawn a blunder, ladles and jelly spoons? This is a definite puzzle rush type of moment. This is the exact type of position you will see in your daily puzzles, in your puzzle rush. We have a beautiful decoy that we can play. And that decoy is to fork the king and the queen with rook d8 check. That gets a double exclam. And Pondini, typing it in just as I was playing it, gets full credit. Pondini, give yourself a pat on the back. And that forces the rook capture. And of course, that now leaves this bishop undefended, upon which, when we capture, creates a fork against the king and the rook, meaning you're getting your rook back with the interest of a bishop. Well, forget the rook. There are only two legal moves here, and there's a checkmate. Who cares about the rook when there's checkmate? Bennett played queen f6, X-ray defending his rook, but this is checkmate. Bada bing, bada boom. Now, let's talk about the numbers. Bobby Fischer had an accuracy of 88.2. James Bennett scored an 82 accuracy, respectable, as were their performance ratings. Bennett had a performance rating of 2100, real good for a 1700 player. But Bobby with a 2350 performance rating, and I am being compared to Paul Harvey by Pondini. No kinder words could be possibly spoken than to be compared to the great Paul Harvey. Thank you for those kind words. So that was round one, played on July 8th, 1957. Rounds 2 and 3 would be played on July 9th, rounds 4 and 5 on the 10th, and then the 11th through 14th were only one round each day. Remember, only the day before, Fischer was finishing up a tournament in Milwaukee, this tournament in San Francisco. He must have been fatigued from travel, but played quite exquisitely.